Welcome to Canada Files. I'm Valerie Pringle. My guest today is the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, Canada's 23rd Prime Minister. He's been famous all his life since he was born on Christmas Day 1971, the oldest son of former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau and his wife Margaret. He became Prime Minister in 2015 and won 3 consecutive elections. He resigned in March 2025, and I spoke with him in Ottawa at his office. Prime Minister, hello.
Hello, Valerie.
On this momentous day where, things have really come to an end, your last cabinet meeting after 9.5 years, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling really good. I'm feeling serene about everything that I got done. I'm feeling excited about being able to spend more time with my kids, excited about, looking for other ways to contribute, but I think I had a good run and glad to be handing off a party that's healthy to a strong leader that is going to keep fighting for the things that matter.
You spent, most of your last weeks as Prime Minister dealing with President Trump and tariffs, trade war. How challenging was that? Was that the worst time?
It's been a complicated 10 years. We had the first Trump presidency, we had a global pandemic, we've had Russia invading Europe in Ukraine, we've had challenges in the Middle East, we've had economic disruptions. There have been, and I'm skipping some of the crises we've faced, there are always difficult times, but the job of a Prime Minister is to be steady, is to remind Canadians that they got this. It's to remind people of the challenges we've been through in the past and how we've got through them. We've always got, whether it's a particularly bad winter storm or a world war, Canadians know how to deal with adversity as long as we pull together, as long as we lean in, as long as we're there for each other. We're a remarkable people, and I just reminding people of who they are and what we're able to do was the most important thing. And quite frankly, if this had been a regular trade war, it might have been more difficult to deal with. But because Donald went so over the top on 51st state attacks on our sovereignty, attacks on our identity, it made it very, very easy for Canadians to pull together and get angry and insulted and want to react. And the greatest strength we have is that unity. I mean, Canada's not divided on anything. We're rolling up our sleeves. We're saying, yeah, this is gonna hurt. This is gonna be tough, but we're gonna do it, and we will, hold out and be strong longer than the Americans will be able to.
Do you fear the conversations about 51st state? Do you think there is an existential crisis for Canada, that we are at risk?
I think the threat of doing significant damage to the Canadian economy is real. I think no matter the level of damage to the Canadian economy, we will never become the 51st state. And almost the more damage is done to the Canadian economy, the more we will dig in our heels and be true to who we are, because there's a lot of similarities between Canadians and Americans. We work together, we play together, we fight together in conflicts and wars, but we're very different. And I think that is something that Canadians know better than Americans know. And the American exceptionalism that says, well, of course, who wouldn't want to join with us? We're like, no, we like being your neighbors most days, but we don't want to be like you. We're very, very proud of who we are, because we know that we're the best country on earth.
I'd like to go back, if I could, to your childhood, which was here in Ottawa. I mean, what are overriding memories you have of the time when your dad was Prime Minister and you and your 2 brothers were growing up here in the spotlight?
It was a different spotlight back then. No social media, not the same kind of visibility that my kids and public life has now. My biggest memories from then were, watching my dad, do meaningful things, especially on international travel, because,
You traveled with him, was it? You went to 51 countries by the time you were 13 years old.
Yeah,
it's pretty awesome.
So, and that was really one of the only places I got to see him actually prime ministering, right? Because I didn't sit around and watch him in the House of Commons. But then when we traveled with him, I got to see him debating with advisors around the breakfast table about the day what they were going to have. I got to see him engaging around the world. But the biggest understanding of what my father did actually happened after we left politics, when for the rest of his life, random people would come up to him and say, thank you for what you did. My family was able to come to Canada because of you, or you made a difference in my community, or you helped stand up for our rights, or whatever it was. And I understood the very personal, individual impact my father was able to have through his service without ever having met these people. The idea that you could shape and change the world for the better and really have an impact on people's lives in a way that was so real, without being there to hold their hand in their daily lives, but by taking care of the big levers that shaped the country and the world, that was something that always amazed me.
There was one story I loved of Ronald Reagan coming for lunch to your house.
Yeah, he came over and he impressed me so deeply. I know he and my father didn't necessarily get along, but my father, all my life, had been reciting me poetry. He started with Cyrano and Wordsworth, and I remember the first lines of verse he ever taught me was, "And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils." But like he used to train us in our memories on reciting poetry and poems and soliloquies and monologues and stuff, which is how I ended up a drama teacher for a maternity leave at one point that ended up being part of my story. But I knew my father was sort of not necessarily aligned with Reagan, even at whatever I was, 12 or 13 years old. But Reagan came in and he did the thing my father did, which is recite poetry. He recited from memory the shooting of Dan McGrew, the Robert Service poem. And I just sat there going, Dad, what are you talking about? This guy's great.
And with that voice, it's Ronald Reagan.
That voice, it was wonderful. And it was one of those moments where I understood the impact that someone being totally focused, even on a kid, and giving them their full attention just for a minute or two, had a lasting impact. And that was something that I always kept with me. This idea that you meet someone maybe for the only time you're going to meet them in your life. You have 20 seconds, 30 seconds. If you can actually totally focus on them and be interested in them and listen to them, then that adds benefit to the world. And that was something that impressed me deeply about Reagan.
Now your mom, you've had up and down relationship with her. You wrote about in your autobiography. She's a spectacular person, but it took a long time for her to get a proper diagnosis for her bipolar disorder. So, she was struggling with that through a lot of your childhood and made things tough.
Yeah, I didn't understand. I remember at one point, I guess in my 20s, we were looking at old pictures, and I said, "Oh, Mom, look, your hair was so short there." She says, "Yeah, I remember that. I was really struggling with depression then." And that was, in my 20s, the first time I was like, oh, okay. It just clicked for me that she had struggled with mental illness, and the level of which it was stigmatized, the level of which nobody talked about it. For her to just share that, I was like, oh, I know things were tough, but things probably weren't that. It was just an instant reaction. But what I've seen, both in supporting her through some very, very difficult times through my 20s and 30s, and what I've seen in terms of the evolution of conversations around mental health and mental wellness has been absolutely inspiring. And I've always been very open about how incredibly proud I am of my mom, and how, my father taught me a particular style of strength, and it was just very strong strength.
Intellectual.
The stoicism, the unflappability, even though he was very, very sensitive, he built this shell. My mom showed me strength through vulnerability, strength through love, strength through openness, strength through even pain and hurt, that that was incredibly important to me. So what I learned from my mom in supporting my mom through mental health challenges, as we now know, everyone knows family members or friends who are struggling, and instead of hiding it, we're talking about it and we're supporting it, and that is an incredible, incredible advance.
When your youngest brother died in the avalanche, Michelle, that obviously was devastating. You say the light went out in your dad's soul. Your mom struggled mightily then, and obviously so did you, all of you.
Yeah.
And your brother.
Yeah, we all did. Mishi was, in his early 20s. He was, living the life he wanted. He had, moved to the mountains, was filled with joy, was on track to start a family way before the rest of us did, and he was just taken. And it was, I reflect on, my father never got over it, died a couple of years later. My mom struggled incredibly. We still can't talk about him without crying in each other's arms. Yeah. And it's challenging, but understanding loss, understanding how much it matters that you hold the people you love and that you make sure that everything you do. I remember my reflection afterwards wasn't, oh, live every day as if it's your last. Life's not a Hallmark card. But every year to check in and say, am I doing the things that I need to be doing, that I want to be doing with my life, because I might not get another year. We always get another day. We might not get another year. And that idea of doing right by every single opportunity you have year over year changed me and shaped me in the path I would then take.
What made you want to become a teacher? Why'd you do that?
Oh, I was one of those kids who was the one who was always looking out for younger siblings and cousins and organizing the games and doing all the things, and I loved explaining things. I loved helping people learn. I loved it when the lights went on for people. So I knew, okay, being a teacher is something that I would love to do.
And yet politics happened. Was it your destiny, or why did you make that change and think, okay, I'm not going to be like my dad, and then, okay, maybe in a different way, I will.
But it was in the different way that was the key. My father got into politics. He was brought into politics to be a minister. He was brought into politics, as a fully formed intellectual with very clear ideas about what he wanted to do. He wasn't much interested in the campaigning side of things. He wasn't much interested in the being a politician. He wanted to be a statesman. That's what he was his entire career. He wasn't a very active, constituency MP or anything. And when I went from teaching, I went back to school for a few years. I started doing a lot of environmental and youth activism and advocacy. And when the Liberal Party lost an election and was in need of sort of reviving itself, that was a moment of eye-opening for me. And then when I went to the 2006 Leadership Convention and was active, I realized that I wasn't really like my father in that I actually genuinely liked meeting with people and talking with them. I was actually more like my grandfather, my mother's father, who was also a politician.
Jimmy Sinclair,
who was known to be an extraordinarily gregarious people person on that. And I sort of said, wow, I'll be doing this. I'm doing this a totally different way than my father did. I'm doing this in my way. And I still remember the first time, maybe it was 6 months after I eventually got elected, where I read an article where they said, Justin Trudeau made a comment on something in the House of Commons today, and they didn't say Justin Trudeau, son of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And that was a moment where I was like, okay, I remember that good first moment, and then it just sort of went on. And now, not a lot of people reflecting on comparing me to my father. They're just focused on what we're doing, and that matters.
What accomplishments are you most proud of in your tenure?
I think it has to do around what we did for families, what we did about making sure that we're giving supports to people who need it. The first thing we did was the Canada Child Benefit, which was a means-tested, tax-free payment to families that has lifted hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty. And then we sort of continued to do more things around school food programs, around $10 a day childcare, around dental care for kids who need it, and now for seniors who need it as well. Things that are actually, I mean, they're seen of as, oh, they're just all social programs, but they're actually building the foundation of a strong economy, making sure people can fully participate regardless of, you know, what corner of the country you're born in, what challenges you have, what socioeconomic status you come from. Those things that made an impact as we did them will also carry forward to a better and richer country with more opportunities for people to actually achieve their potential. And that's what we need in a country like Canada.
How do you feel about how you dealt with COVID?
Canadians came together in COVID and were there for each other like few other countries did. We had a higher rate of vaccination. We were like 85% double vaccinated. People were out there banging on pots and pans to support our frontline workers. People were listening to public health directives, quarantining, staying home. We were able to deliver the kinds of income supports, $500 a week, and we were able to bounce back faster from COVID and had a less deadly pandemic than just about any of our peer countries. And that's because Canadians pulled together through it, and Canadians were remarkably united through that period of time.
Then there was a bit of a division about that, the trucker convoy, you know, and all that. The people sort of diverged on that.
Well, I think it was one of the first examples of what happens when a small number of people are able to amplify their voices in ways that really, really take over the entire conversation. And one of the things that I can't get out of my mind is the stories that I've heard of people who were dying on respirators in their hospital beds, bitterly regretful that they listened to the wrong websites, listened to the wrong influencers, and thought that the vaccine was more dangerous than the virus. That was something that I found absolutely unacceptable. As I was trying to do everything I could to keep everyone alive, there were other people out there pushing to make people vulnerable, to make people scared, and to put their lives at risk. And yeah, that did make me angry, and I don't apologize for being angry when it cost people lives.
One of the issues that's most important to you is Indigenous rights and reconciliation, improving lives. How do you feel you did on that?
It is an issue that was always the unfinished business of Confederation. And there's, time, I mean, my father, when he repatriated the Constitution, put Indigenous rights into the Constitution. That was a really important thing to guarantee fundamental rights. But it was never something that was ever taken as a big political goal until our government. And it is right that we spend still a lot of time focusing on the unfinished business, the work we need to do. But there are so many Indigenous communities and leaders and people across this country who have seen their lives significantly and materially improved over these past 10 years. Progress happens at the speed of trust. And so much of what we needed to do was rebuild broken trust for many different reasons, but for economic reasons as well. Because if we are going to be, mining more rare earth elements and building the critical mineral supplies that the world needs to rely on from reliable partners, then we're going to need to do that in partnership and in trust with Indigenous peoples who are stewards of the land. And rebuilding that trust is going to let us do more things responsibly around natural resources than anyone else is able to do around the world.
The first president you dealt with when you were first elected was Barack Obama. Tell me about your relationship with him.
Barack is an amazing person. Extraordinarily smart, totally dedicated to the seriousness of his job. He's a very good man.
Did he give you advice about Trump? When he was elected, did he tell you to hold the mountaintop?
Yeah, that's exactly. He said, hold the mountaintop. And I said, oh, no, Neil, I appreciate that, but no, we're on a good run. I think we're going to expand the mountaintop. We're going to take the valleys too. He's like, hold the mountaintop. And that was very good advice through the first time with Donald Trump, who, quite frankly, you know, I mean, one of the things that I remind Donald of when we speak is we did big things together. The renegotiation of the NAFTA agreement into the USMCA has created jobs and growth and benefit in the United States, in Canada, and in Mexico. It was a good deal that has made our economies stronger, more resilient, created jobs for all of us, created prosperity. It was a big thing to have done together. And you know, Donald is rightly proud of it, as am I, as are the Mexicans. Like, this was a good thing, and that ability to focus on, you know, things we agreed on, like building a stronger economy, was the important thing I got to do. But it was all about, you know, yes, working with whoever the Americans elect, while standing up clearly and strongly for Canadian values and Canadian interests. And walking that line carefully but solidly was what we did.
Your mom has famously told you that, you know, there were enormous personal costs to a life in politics. Your marriage ended, you know, as your parents had done during your time in office, which would have been incredibly hard. I mean, and you lived it as a kid, and you're doing it with your kids.
It was. I have had a 20-year partnership with Sophie that was just incredible, and we remain very good friends, co-parents, and I learned a bit about the, you know, how to manage separation from my parents, who weren't always good at it, but
loved each other throughout.
Loved each other throughout. And that example of, you know, I'll love Sophie as a friend, as a best friend for the rest of my life, and that's an example I want to give to my kids. But politics is really, really hard, and the level of full commitment that I had to give to my job, and then a little time for my kids, and probably not enough time for Sophie, was really difficult. But you know, we grow, we learn, and we have 3 extraordinary kids out of it who, you know, we've worked very hard to try and keep normal in a very abnormal life.
So why'd you stay so long? Because, you know, you could have left a year, 2, 3 years ago. You decided to stay on.
Not ready to leave. I still have more to do, and I still have more to do right now. I am leaving, you know, full of energy and determination for this country, but I'm also really, like I said, serene about where I am, excited about figuring out next steps, and I have no idea what they're going to be. Excited on, you know, catching up on sleep, catching up on basketball tournaments and you know, recitals and everything that I will be present for. I'm looking forward to cooking again. I love to cook. Sophie always complained that I'm too slow when I cook, so I never cook that much around the family. But every now and then on a weekend, I'll cook a little bit, and I've now created a list of recipes of things that I look forward to learning how to make. And I'm going to start with easy shepherd's pie, but then I'm going to get more and more. I'm just looking forward to getting a certain level of life back and figuring out a pace that is not the unbelievable intensity of being a prime minister, even though I loved it every step of the way.
The final question we always ask is, what does being Canadian mean to you?
It means not being afraid to be challenged by differences. We're a country that came together, first English and French, informed by the Indigenous people who lived here, that were, you know, in conflict for centuries, especially English and French, and we decided to build a country that would have people who were totally different, culturally, religiously, linguistically, historically, from each other, and yet we were Canadian. when you have that level of diversity, you have a level of resilience where all the different solutions, all the different stories that come together are so much greater than the sum of their parts. So Canadians are people who are open to each other, open to respecting and being challenged by each other, a place that goes beyond tolerance. Because when you say, I tolerate you, I mean, come on, who really wants to be tolerated, right? I put up with your right to exist, but don't come and date my daughter is sort of the message around and there's places in the world where tolerance would be a very good thing. But Canada, we should be talking about acceptance. There's not a religion in the world that says, tolerate thy neighbor. It's love your neighbor. It's be open to each other, learn from each other, be challenged without being threatened by someone who has different perspectives or different stories. That's what Canadians do so well. And when we're cheering this flag, when we're in tough times and pulling together for each other, that's us at our best. And when we're at our best, nobody can stop us.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you for all you've done.
Appreciate it.
Cheers. We'll be back next week with another episode of Canada Files.
The preceding program was made possible through the generous support of Ted and Alice Kernahan, as well as the following donors: David and Cheryl Carr, the Linwood Family Foundation, Jim and Sandy Triliving, the Browning Watt Foundation, Richard Pilasoff, Michael McCain and family, Richard Wernham and Julia West, Mary Davey, Clench House Foundation, Bryce and Nikki Douglas, the 63 Foundation, Tony and Sherry Fell, the Sheila and David Wilson Foundation, and by the Central Canadian Public Television Association.